Okay. This session will be recorded, and all of our registered guests will receive a copy of the recording at the conclusion of today's session, along with some additional resources that we encourage you to share with your colleagues when you share this awesome presentation out. We ask that you remain muted until the question and answer portion at the end of today's presentation. But please, we encourage you to engage with us in the comments, drop your questions in the comments, as well as use the reactionary buttons like the heart and the claps when you hear something that speaks out to you. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Dr. Gray. Dr. Gray is an assistant professor in the School of Information Studies at Syracuse University, where she teaches in the Library and Information Science Master's Degree Program. Her research examines the Black information experience in the areas of information justice, Black feminist, and memory work. She is a 2021 recipient of the Institute of Museum and Library Services Early Career Research Development Grant to support her Uncovering Black Lives project. This research will analyze collections, artifacts, and capturing of the stories of African American genealogical community members. This project was inspired by her award-winning dissertation, In a Collective Voice, Uncovering the Black Feminist Information Community of Activist Mothers in Chicago Public Housing from 1955 to 1970, where she used genealogical research to uncover her grandmother and a community of women working for betterment in Chicago public housing. After an 8-year career as an academic librarian, Dr. Gray earned her PhD at the College of Communication and Information at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. In addition, in addition to an MLIS from Dominican University, she holds an MSED in Educational Psychology from Northern Illinois University and a Bachelor of Science in Rehabilitation and Child Development from Wilberforce University. I told y'all were in for a treat, so let's all welcome Dr. Gray.
Thank you, Sierra. Hopefully you all can hear me. Okay, I'm speaking out in my room as if I was in a room with you. Firstly, I would like to thank Dr. Nicole Cook and for this wonderful opportunity. It's this lecture series starting last year was a lifeline during the pandemic, and it brought community together amongst library and information professionals and scholars and students and all other family members and church family and whoever else were attending the session. And I am very extremely grateful to be able to share with you this afternoon. The title of my lecture is Soil Sifting, Unearthing Ancestral Communities in the Black Informational Experience. And I'll just be very honest with you and say, oh, I set myself up, right? Because, you know, the title is inspired and so is the work. So I appreciate you taking the time out to listen to me speak on my work and how I view the informational world. And before I begin, in speaking on soil and land, and to acknowledge, and I'm coming to you from Syracuse University, and I want to acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous people on whose ancestral land Syracuse University now stands. And before I begin, just a sincere thanks. And this is to colleagues that have helped me with my work since my appointment here at Syracuse. First and foremost, the Library and Information Investigative Team at the School of Information Studies. And I listed the faculty here, and I'll call their names. Dr. Rachel Clark, Dr. Beth Patin, Dr. Jasmina Tacheva, and Dr. Sebastian Madro, and myself, and a host of PhD students, postdocs, and master students and undergraduates that pursue research in equity and justice and information. My own Black Information Experience research group, including John Bay Choi, a PhD student, Rachel Nutt, Isaiah McGee, Maddie Lido, Raz Nesher, and Avery Arden, all master students in library and information studies. And a shout out to some of my collaborators, and those collaborators are inclusive to the other list, but Dr. Bharat Mehra, June Young, Ellen Simpson, and Joseph Winberry. Like to just give a sincere thanks, because these are the people that helped me sort these things in my mind. And no one is alone on their journey, and these people have traveled with me, as have many others. Okay, so I'm going to start at the beginning here with this image. And in this presentation, there's a lot of imagery. I wanted it so we can engage with how I see it. All right, and I wanted to start with this picture here. My memory of it is maybe in the 1980s. I'll estimate in the 1980s. My grandmother had a visitor, and this man, and he's one of the young boys featured on the right of this photograph, brought this to her. And he said that some white man took it when they were children in Cleveland, Mississippi, in Bolivar County. And to me, this represents the legacy and the ancestry and the earth from which we came in the American experience. And oftentimes, when we think about this history and the way it's communicated to us, especially since I would call it the racial reawakening of 2020, is we use terms like unearth and uncover. And I've used these myself. In fact, this is called unearthing. Hidden, unknown, never seen, untold, overlooked. And a lot of these terms are used in conjunction in how we see Black history and Black experience in the United States. And it's pervasive in the language. If you do any search on Black history, you will see these associated terms with it. And I feel it as my duty to demonstrate how using these type of tools of uncovering and unearthing and telling of the hidden and untold and overlooked as a purpose of mine, especially in the field of information studies. Many times we try to make communities fit. And what I'm presenting here is not how they fit, but how they exist on their own terms. Okay, and to do this, I've looked at the process of family on American soil. All right, and here lies a tombstone of an ancestor, the oldest that I've been able to find. His name was Henry Brown, born in 1805, died July 19th, 1905. And his epitaph reads, and you can't see it here, but it reads, in life, beloved, in death, lamented, which I found was a quite often used phrase during the late 19th and early 20th century. But I began to put together in my mind what it meant in terms of land and soil and where we exist in the earth. In a fit of passion in a class last spring, I said racism is in the soil. All right. And I wanted to keep returning to that soil to sort of sift it out, to sift out all of the trauma, sifting out the abuse, sifting out the violence. All right, to find this to find this, the place where our people and my people exist. And I'll just talk a little bit about what I mean by soil sifting. And I'm borrowing here from Black feminist literature in various disciplines, starting with Catherine McKittrick, where she calls Black geographies and thinking about place and space, the terrain of political struggle itself, or where the imperative of a perspective of struggle takes place. And then soil sifting in matter out of place. And Deborah Gray White, the esteemed historian who wrote Aren't I a Woman? This is from an article, Black Female Scholars in the Academy, but she wrote about the Black female on plantation, and it was published in 1985. And in this particular essay about her work in terms of Black women in the academy, she says to be matter out of place is to be a disquieting disruption of convention. And we think of this matter as within the transportation and the forced migrations of Africans to the Americas, and our matter being out of place. And also to draw on the fantabulous work of Alondra Nelson, who was a very, very much a inspiration in my dissertation work, when she talks about soil sifting and reconciliation, in terms of reconciliation as lineages, families, and knowledge of the past to make political claims of the present. Again, sifting out this soil in terms of reconciliation. And also in my own work in soil sifting and ancestral communities, where I state in my dissertation, immersion into the past is not an exercise of biological determinism, but a search for familiar voice united with the community collective. And I also addressed this in my recently funded grant, in the grant narrative, in that in ancestral communities and thinking about soil sifting is the act of uncovering Black lives and the communities that surround it, which provides a unique opportunity to investigate and reveal the cultural dimensions of unearthing the micro histories that have indeed shaped society, and answers questions around identity, liberation, resistance, and struggle. So, just to lean in on this introduction of the work that I'm doing in soil sifting and unearthing is taking, the mixture of what's become rocky land, to sift it, to find the experience of Black life, and in turn communicate in the context of a Black information experience. And within the Black information experience, I describe it as an act of reclamation to the fullness of the myriad of stories created with the collective conscience of decentering white canonistic thought that permeates society. I'm of the firm belief, and I've stated this earlier, and I will continue to say this throughout, is that in the context of the information theoretical landscape and how we study information science, is being from a Black perspective, that we must name it for ourselves, all right, and claim what was already present. The design of theory and knowing and understanding the Black information experience is not at the hands of what the white canon describes information to be. We were rich before they arrived. All right. And also in the Black information experience, I say that it's the reclamation of memory practices that catapult a familial ancestral connection to history and places them within it. This history is not what happens to someone else. The lineages connect the individual to a unified and undiscovered path. And this is from my new article, which will be published next month, fingers crossed, on Naomi Willie Pollard Dobson, a pioneering Black librarian, 1883 and 1971. And just to reiterate what that means in the Black information experience, and I know I'm taking my time to go through this, and the reasoning is because not for an inclusion to this thought in the white canon, but to carve out a space for itself. All right. And many times, and the reason why I chose these particular statements to begin with, and to understand the process of sifting soil and the sieve in which we see ourselves, is to kind of separate, and I'm not preaching separatism, but to separate what's useful, all right, and what grows us. And I'm going to ask you to journey with me this next half hour or so as I talk about my work in the context of the ancestral communities and the Black experience. And as I said, there were many, many visuals that will be represented within this, and I will speak around them so that you may engage with it. And if we notice on this particular slide, and some of these will be repeated, is you see the company of women to the far right there. And in the middle, top middle, you see children in a library in a reading room. And then to the left of that, you see the Henry Booth House in the public housing in Chicago, and I'll get to that. And in the bottom there is the faculty of Wilberforce University of the normal department, and I'll get to that also. But in this journey, I'll speak on all of these elements. Okay, in the Black information experience, I'll talk about theory, my theory of the Black feminist information community, legacy, looking at familial grounding, and unearthing the seeking of ancestral community in my work, and sifting, right, in search of Naomi, and I'll get to that at the end. Okay, let's start with theory or thought. And this is a model developed out of my research work for my dissertation. And in that, the data revealed through a evidence inquiry, grounded theory analysis of historical and archival documents, this model of Black feminist information community. And it has 5 elements here, including space and place, voice, information, belief system, and mobilization. And pay attention to some of the language here on centering and situating and communal and shared and galvanization or galvanizing. This is important for us to situate, and I'm going to keep reiterating this, situating the Black experience in information field. Okay, and just a quick note about situating inclusive community. And here lies a photo of the public housing community, Dearborn Homes. And in my research, I looked at the Dearborn Homes and Harold Ickey's homes in Chicago. And with and in the development of the theory, what I saw was the importance of the home place. All right. And the pride in that home place, whether in the public housing area, whether down home, say, and for my family and many others, migration, the down home in Mississippi, I'll say, in that migration experience. And I said that space is redefined by the presence and information of community members, countering deficit assumptions of space inhabited by those of a specific race and socioeconomic class. Okay, and the second element is voice, and this is how I particularly centered that work. and into very famous, and this is not my research exactly, but it draws from this particular tradition, where we hear the voice of Anna Julia Cooper, who titles her text "A Voice from the South" by a Black woman from the South. And in Sojourner's Truth is contested, but her saying, "Aren't I a woman also?" But voice involves both a reclamation and an assertion. It's about knowledge of the self and knowledge of the self in community, and to be able to speak on it and to use that to move the collective and oneself. All right, in the fifth part, in galvanizing for a resistance through mobilization. And within this, we see the understanding of the communal space as a place of resistance, and within that, the isolation and marginality of folks in these marginalized spaces is a place of power. In this, I draw from the theoretical work of our departed Bell Hooks, who says that marginality is a place of power. All right, and movement comes from that space. All right, and in information, not simply as information, as we know it, is the presence of a communal knowledge sharing. And this is personified in the Black information experience. And it's a humanizing of information. And it's a relational in that it shares aspects of communal membership and participation in the pursuit of social justice. And lastly, and this is last but not least, is this shared cultural consciousness, which is represents belief systems and values that that really engendered the community in how they move forward using language. And this is representative documents there, you can't really see them, but I'll read them out too. They use words in this in the flyer on the left, like "we" and like "neighbors." All right, and then taking ownership of the space, like "you," and having these shared values. And then the newspaper uh, article to the left, they say in that article, and I know it by heart, is that we believe that our public housing community is just as good as any other place. And I'm paraphrasing here. We have a place here where our children grow up, they go to school, and they go on to get their education. And so these shared value systems inform the Black information experience. Okay, and so moving on from that, and in utilizing the elements of the Black information experience, I'll tell you a few stories here. And I'm going to start with legacy on familial grounding. And keep in mind those elements of values, of communal sharing, and of space. And I'll give a little narrative about this photo here. This is a picture of Solomon Chapel AME Church in Cleveland, Mississippi, and I will say circa 1930. And when I when one thinks, and I'm starting from my ancestors, if you would bear with me, when one thinks of the family, especially in genealogical research, we think about these individuals, and we think about these vital statistics, and we think about the miracles in the Black experience and the miracles of their lives. And with my particular point of view and how I approach this is this familial grounding was the extended community in this context. So pictured here are, and I won't point her out, are my grandmother, her cousins, and her great grandmother as members of this church, and generationally known. And I'll just sidestep here that our family continues membership with the African Methodist Episcopal Church as a part of our ancestral experience and our informational experience. Okay, and so in looking at the legacy here, and for most of those that do Black genealogical work, which is a part of my grant research, and in that I'll be studying those that actually do it, and in the community that shapes them. I started my own research many years ago, maybe about over 25 years ago. And herein represents in the historic record the earliest document I could find, which was the 1870 census, and how this outlined that particular family on my maternal line, years just shortly after the emancipation. And in that lies Henry Brown, the tombstone that we viewed, and the dates are mixed up, but we know how that is, because it said 1805 in the beginning. His wife, Jillian Brown, and their children, Cyrus, Paulina, Isabella, and Madison. And something about where they were located, and we could see if we look at the close-up, and Henry being born in Tennessee. All right, and I came full circle when I earned my PhD at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and that's a whole nother reparations conversation. But also, in Alabama, and their children in Mississippi. And in this particular legacy of the family, which was located in that community, in the church community, provides the foundation for how I am approaching and understanding how I conduct my research and view of the world. And in that particular legacy, and the highlighted name was this particular ancestress here, Paulina, Pliny, all of the variations of her name, and they called her Mama. But in her, I found a sort of grounding. All right, and it lets, and the interesting part about this is this was this woman here, who was my grandmother's great grandmother, actually raised her. And my grandmother was with me until I was 29 years old. And just to let us understand what those ties represent, and that the woman who played a significant, who had a significant influence on my life, was raised by a woman who was formerly enslaved. So, it doesn't escape me that we are not far from these experiences. And what I do in my research is try to look at them and how they operated in community. Not necessarily her, but her granddaughter, my grandmother. And the first example of this is through the migration. And here is a photo here of my grandmother standing in the back there with an iron and with her. I don't know the context of it. I found this after she passed away, but I would assume that it was a sewing group or friends. I do know one of the women in the right front foreground, Bertha Flamen, and what this shows here, and this is what one of my students, Rachel Nutt, accomplished in a retelling of my dissertation work through a website, is that when we think about this movement from the South to the North, and we see, images that reflect, escape in a way, and movement towards something, displacement, usually with the accompanying family members and luggage and such. But here we see, I guess, what I would call contentment in that process. And what really strikes me is not just that, oh, here's a picture of my grandmother, but here is her as a woman amongst other women, even in leisure and in work, which I can assume that they are doing here. All right. And then moving forward from the legacy in seeking ancestral community. All right, and I'll start with the public housing library campaign in Henry Booth House. Now, on this second look or movement into understanding the Black information experience from the ancestral roots to a different placement. And the last photo there of the young women post-migration on the south side of Chicago shows this new reality and this new communal experience, but was brought with them from their roots in the South. And in my dissertation work and continued work, I look at in Chicago this public housing community and how there was a representative library campaign there by a collective of women and their participation in a neighborhood settlement house, which is in the foreground there, the two-story building, Henry Booth House. All right, and so in thinking about public housing as ancestral space, now I have recollections as a child and hearing my mom and my other aunts and uncles, grandparents talk about what they called the Ickeys. All right, and the Ickeys were Harold L. Ickey's homes in Chicago, built in 1955, sorry. And neighboring that was Dearborn Homes, where you see the woman pushing the baby carriage and the child, which came as a result of urban renewal, housing acts in the late 1930s. And we see the proliferation of these public housing communities because of low standard of housing in many of the Black areas where our people were regulated to in what was described as slums. And I would say, well, they were forced to live there because there wasn't opportunities to move out. And there are many stories surrounding that. But in my pursuit of seeking ancestral community, I claimed as an ancestral space beyond the soil of Mississippi to the concrete of the public housing in Chicago. All right. And while my family was there, my grandmother, along with a collective of women, uh, fought for the community to have a library. And this is where my research journey begins. Serendipitously, I was looking in the Chicago Defender doing genealogical work and typing in names to see if someone would show up. And I found this article. I would say I was studying to be a librarian, so I would estimate the date around 2004 when I found it, when I was studying at Dominican University. And I typed in my grandmother's name and the result came out, the blast city for lack of near South Side library in the results. And I said, well, what is this about? And I saw library. I'm studying at a library school and I would like to be a librarian. And what does my grandmother's name have to do with any of this? And in the second paragraph is her name, Mrs. Frances Cummings, and that she was the chairman of a library or chairwoman of a library committee that wanted to have a library built in or near public housing for their children's education. And in that fight and in using her voice, they critiqued urban renewal. They critiqued city planners. They loosed a tirade, and when one article said on city officials to let them know that this was a meaningful necessity for them. And what my work dictates uh, or garners from this is not necessarily from an administrative view that, oh yes, these poor people need a library. It's from the ground up where, oh yes, these women in this community say they would like to have a library or they demand library setting. And this is layered as such in that not only is information represented amongst the collective of women in their community, but that information was not something they did not have access to, but that they demanded access for educational purposes. So we're looking within the information experience. Okay, and this is a photo of that community, and this is in the home or private archive of myself. I would say it was in my grandmother's things, but these and forgive me, I don't know all of the women in the photo. I do recognize my grandmother in the top right, leaning over with a white blouse on and a short haircut there. But to say that in my efforts to single her out in the search for her life or moments thereof in the newspaper, I found her amongst a community of women. All right. And in functioning in the tradition of the Black information experience. All right. And they operated out of a community settlement house. All right. And just a brief on the settlement house history in Chicago. The settlement house movement was the brainchild of Jane Addams, who uh, opened and operated Hull House in social services. And the particular settlement house where they operated out of was named Henry Booth House, as I mentioned before, and it was founded in 1898 by the Chicago Ethical Society. And it was located before urban renewal on Chicago's near west side community. But with the building of highways, and we are so familiar with that in the Syracuse city area, with the highways destroying Black communities, and migrant and migration communities, they decided to move, and they chose to move into the public housing. And each of those photos are iteration of Henry Booth House itself, but it served as a connector for the community information space and place. All right. And in public housing, it was organized there to promote fellowship, understanding, and cooperation amongst the various races and nationalities in the neighborhood, rooted in the idea of helping neighbors help themselves. And these photographs, and I will state this now, that most of these photographs from archives are for the University of Illinois at Chicago's archives on Henry Booth House and their settlement house collection. And I had access to those through the Black Metropolis Research Consortium in Chicago, in their summer fellowship in 2018, I believe I was there. And these show in the latter iteration of the settlement house. And what I want to stress here, and as I've been stressing throughout the talk, is the placement of a community as a conductor of information, in the personification of the collective, and how that operates in the Black experience. And here you see children or teens gathered, and also they had a career fair there, which was in the top left corner photo there. All right, and just to and let me go back here to kind of sum up this particular area of what the Black information experience represents there. It is ancestral in part because of the search for the familial. All right, and then is the familial in placement in the community of others, and what happens in the context of community of others, in terms of mobilization, in terms of resistance, in terms of claiming a home place and a place called home. All right. And lastly, and I know I'm short on time here, before questions, but I think I just have 5 minutes left. I'm going to turn away from my family in that community to another discovery. And I would say also this was a serendipitous searching, and where I found this woman pictured here, Naomi uh, Willie Dobson Pollard. And in sifting for her, I I'll explain on the next slide. What I wanted to do for her is place a Black woman's life in family and community. So understanding her in terms of, in the context of her ancestral tree and what she was in family and community. And just a brief explanation here about Naomi. Naomi Dobson Pollard, born in 1883, was the first Black woman to graduate and receive an undergraduate degree from Northwestern University. Um, I found her on an opposite end. I did a search here, and I'll go back to the slides. I did a search for Wilberforce University late one night, avoiding writing my dissertation to look at some of the old catalogs from my alma mater, Wilberforce University, Historical Black College in Ohio. And of course, as a librarian, I looked to see who the librarian was. And in the 1915 catalog, I found Naomi W. Pollard, instructor in library economy. When I saw AB Northwestern University, I said, oh, a woman from Chicago. And oh, in my first inclination, I said, well, at most of these HBCUs at that time, the librarians were not Black. Uh, they mostly were white. But in my discovery, I found that not only had she graduated from Northwestern, and she was a English teacher, she worked in the Chicago Public Library. And when she was at Wilberforce University, she set up a curriculum on library economy and taught courses on library methods, what she called them, and also in children's reading and literature. Okay. And in sifting out her life, and this will be in my upcoming publication next month, is to find her in terms of where she was. And this is her in the 1905 graduation at Northwestern University. As I stated, the first Black woman to do so. But part of her story, and this is in the article, is one of Black determination and white consternation. Why was she there? What was she doing there in Northwestern? She could not live on campus. In her papers, in her alumni survey profile, they asked her, did she have any friends from her time there? She firmly said no, period, and then moved on to the next statement. So as a part of her life there, and in sifting the soil, I went from the catalog to Northwestern University, and then to the archive and ancestry, and also to her particular family. And what makes her important, and this is in terms of sifting, it wasn't just her as an individual, in which she was remarkable, but in the context of the familial, which her parents are featured next to a photo of her, and the next three are her brothers. But her family was significant in that they were the first Black family who lived in the Rogers Park, West Rogers Park area in Chicago. And her brother, Fritz Pollard, was the first African American NFL football coach. All right. And so, in terms of sifting to understand her in an informational context and in her experience, I had to locate her, number one, amongst men, because she was not herself. She wasn't Naomi in any record or Naomi Pollard after her marriage. And also that, her experience was one not just in the singular, but within the collective, and a woman amongst women. Okay. All right. And I will end here. because I would like to talk with you more, and I wanted to, give a preview of some of the workings of how I'm situating the Black information experience. And this particular photo is Naomi with the faculty there at Wilberforce University. And I didn't give a little shout out to my alma mater, which was founded in 1856 in Ohio by the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And she's standing up front, a petite woman right in the middle there amongst the other faculty. To say that her life, though it be her own, was within the context of the informational experience. And in my work and in my research, it's always a search to find not not only the ancestor, in placement, but the ancestor in placement in community and in information community. All right, and I would like to thank you and welcome any questions, discussions, or insights.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gray. So while we're you're getting so many kudos and thanks in the chat box, and while we are allowing folks to formulate some questions, there was a question that came up earlier, and essentially they wanted to know, what advice do you have for beginning researchers who might want to do this work or similar work?
I don't know the context. If it's I would say trust the directions, or trust your own voice and the directions that you want to follow. All right. A part of what I've done, and I'm going to stop sharing so maybe you can see me. A part of what I've done in my work was to, and I've worked on submitted a proposal with Joseph Winberry on thinking about what me search is. All right. I said a lot of I's and I said a lot of me's in this. And because of that, and leaning into that, I kind of found my own self in my voice. And to understand, and, speaking with my coach, and understanding that I've always been meaning making throughout my journey and in those things I encountered. All right. You don't have to separate who you are in your world from what you want to pursue.
Yes, thank you. And I went back and looked, and I think you pretty much addressed the question. The question was specific to ancestry. So do you have any additional thoughts, or is, what your advice that you gave hold true for ancestral work as well?
I would say yes. All right. And so, at the beginning of my dissertation, I tell a short narrative of what got me into this. And, I might be telling on myself and my age, haha, but when I was in first grade, that's when The Roots appeared on television, was televised. And I don't know if those who were born later, as many of you were, or those of you who have a living memory of it, is that it was a phenomenon. Everybody watched it. And so as a task in that, we had to do these family trees. That was the homework. And this is first grade. And I sat with my grandmother in her TV room, and one of the bedrooms was called a TV room. It had a console TV, for those of you who knows what that is. And she gave me these names. She said, write this down. And I don't know how well I did it. You're talking about a first grader, right? But it stuck with me. All right. And as a passion and hobbyist, I'm not a professional genealogist. It really was part of the impetus, besides understanding community, that drew me to library school, because I knew I would find all of those clues and answers and search strategies. So, it found me. And in that sense, I keep the ball rolling, and not necessarily just to find the names as I have or the figures, but to understand theoretically and give meaning to their experiences, and to situate them in the context of my discipline in information studies.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mhm.
So we have a question from our sister scholar, Dr. Beth Pautan. How do we educate the next generation of librarians, archivists, and information professionals so they can support Black ancestral research?
Thank you so much, Beth. So happy to see you. um, and this is something I do in class. So I'll provide an example. In any subject that I'm teaching, be it mostly reference services. I've also taught collections development and management. Uh, what in each of those courses, I introduce those materials that focus on legacies. All right. And so, for example, in the reference course, I introduced the annual report of the Louisville Public Library, what was called the Colored Library in Louisville, by Thomas Fountain Blue, and his report. Let's read a report of reference from the 1940s there in Louisville Public Library, and let's examine what reference looked like there, because it wouldn't have, I don't think it would occur to students at that moment to consider that. All right, so that's one point of reference. And in another context, in the collections class, I have the students read this article, and the title is escaping me. Oh, it's called "Harvesting My Father's Mementos," and it's by a Nigerian artist, and he talks about collections, family, community, and artifacts in the West African experience, right? And also how those were taken. So it's not just collections, and we do have to learn a lot of things administratively in collections development in the field, but it's also the infusion or introducing of those things in the context of our courses. And also have had students do genealogy presentations of reference sources for class also. So it's a part of me, so I try to keep it in there. Thank you so much, Beth.
Excellent. Thank you. The next question is from Andrea Lemoynes. Andrea says, much of what you shared spoke to the power of public space and information sharing in our ancestral communities. Do you feel that it is still happening today? What power do we see coming out of public spaces today?
Oh, I mean, it's quite and something I didn't, expound on too much in my presentation, and coming out of my dissertation research, is what I call the women in that community are participating in the tradition that has no name. Okay, so even amongst plantation women in the South that Deborah Gray White wrote about, Daviola Glymph wrote a beautiful historical book on women in those refugee camps at the Civil War, and how they came together. And we could talk about the club movements. We could talk about labor, all of these in tradition. And I just moved it towards what I saw the people who were associated with my family doing in terms of the public housing. But we see it in the second wave of Black feminism. We see it in hashtag Black Girl Magic. We see it hashtag Black Women Working. We see it in terms of collective self-care. So it's that doesn't, it just doesn't exist in the past. It's just where I located it. It continues. Right. And even on the playground when we were playing double dutch, but that's a side joke, but think about that coming together.
Yes, love it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next question is from Kiana Harris. For learning more about the Black feminist information community model that you shared, do you have any other recommended readings?
Well, you can read my dissertation. There's also a chapter, and forgive me if I can't remember, in Dr. Bharat Smera's most recent book, and maybe someone in my community here could post it for me, in Social Justice, where I talk about that particular model. It's a chapter there, Social Justice and Design in Library and Information Science, where I talk about that particular model, and kind of break it down more. Thank you, Beth.
Yes, thank you, Beth. Librarians to the rescue. All right, are there any additional questions for Dr. Gray? We still have a couple of minutes. If while giving folks a little bit of time to put in any remaining questions, I want to kind of piggyback and shameless plug for the article that Dr. Gray has coming out, and it's coming out in a special double issue of Libraries, History, Culture, and Society. Dr. Gray and I are both board members for that journal, which is doing some really wonderful work. And the special issue in April will be on Black women librarians. So please look out for that. We'll have probably some more announcements and information about that. But Dr. Gray's article is fabulous. And, this presentation, as fabulous as it was, doesn't do justice to this powerful story. So please look out for that. And let's see, we did get another question. This is from Marlena. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on Africana Womanism as compared to Black feminism.
Okay. I want to say, in the comparative now, and it's been years since I've looked at it that way, my introduction into the Black feminist frame or way of knowing came through a course entitled Africana Womanism. And I'm dating myself again, that I took back in 1996 on the campus of Northern Illinois University. And in my understanding of Africana Womanism, which is as a title, or as the titled concept, is that it's inclusive, right? And it's inclusive in understanding the experience of both of Black women and men. And so, in the Black feminist tradition, I would say, and I'll use Patricia Hill Collins's response, because I've seen her response to this, to say, that to me, there's not really a separation or difference. And just to say, my use of the term Black feminism is only because I prefer it. I don't, and Black feminists give to feminist theory in general intersectionality, right? So, it's all together there.
Excellent, thank you. So we have one last question, and we have a request for information, and I'll read you the request, and maybe, if you need to give it some thought, maybe send some links to Sierra and we can post them with your recording. Mark wants to know, this is the request, where he might be able to expand his current research on genealogy besides ancestry.com. So that, if Dr. Gray has thoughts, we will certainly post that with the recording. But the final question I would like to end with is from our friend Joseph Winberry, who says, what do you think your grandmother would have thought of your work, and especially how her unspoken work for a library influenced you so much?
Joseph, why did you go there? Are you trying to get me emotional? I'll tell this by relating a memory. I'll say once on, I think it was 60 Minutes, they were profiling this woman. This was back maybe in the 90s when she was still alive. And they were talking about her extraordinary life and all things that she did. And my grandmother turned to me and said, they could write a book about my life, So she said, I think that she would not be surprised. And what we see, and I saw it as extraordinary, but for her, And the other women and other people in their community, we have to understand that they were ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And sometimes we look on high to see, you know, as I did with Naomi, oh, she's the first Black graduate of Northwestern. Oh, we look at the first Black to do such and such. Oh, we look at these significant business people, but people in their everyday environments, you know, doing extraordinary things. So, you know, I think that she would appreciate this.
Absolutely, as we do appreciate
Yeah.
this. And it's a great way to conclude our session. We are at time, and we are just so grateful and so blessed to have been able to hear from Dr. Gray today. So I know everyone is joining me in the chat and thanking you for this extraordinary research. And you know, for those who don't know Dr. Gray personally, Dr. Gray is a force, and was grateful to, you know, have her in my corner, and grateful that you spent some time with us today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'll give just some shout outs.
Yeah.
My church family is here.
Yes.
My family is here. My work family, my former supervisors, my mentors, everybody. And I would just like to thank you for taking time out to spend this hour with me. It was a joy. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. And we will see you again for the next Baker Diversity Series lecture. Thank you all so very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.